Welcome back to the Champion Draft Series pregame show for the first time today. The for week 5, we're already almost halfway through the series. How are you doing, Aikado? Thank you for joining me on this Thursday.
Doing well, prepping for, the busy month of Runeterra. And yeah, excited to talk about some Champion Draft Series.
Yeah, so for those who don't know anything about this show that we do here, we're sort of hyping up some of the matches that happen in the Champion Draft Series. The Champion Draft Series is a specific series between 10 fierce competitors in the America's Shard that are going head to head with champions that they have drafted. And those champions that they've drafted sort of influence how they can build their decks. They can only use those champions. They have to use regions of the champions in their deck. They have to fill all 6 champion slots in all their deck, though they can ratio it accordingly. It creates a very interesting and dynamic format that is it's been really fun for me as just like a spectator and caster to sort of see how that sort of changes and influence the meta, but also like how it sort of copies and then sometimes fails to copy what would be the regular meta. It's real fun, and it gives me and Aikado a lot to talk about in this show.
For sure.
So we're going to go ahead and jump into the first match of this week, which you guys see right up here on screen. It is between Dizzymondo ORNG, which is headed by L Games Brazil, and then we've got Los Charlangas, which is headed by Slay. Both of these players are from Latin America. Both of these players are currently 1-3 and are really wanting. It sounds really silly every time I say like these players want to win. Every player wants a win, right? In sort of a competitive setting. But both of these players like are the one who leaves this match the victor is definitely going to feel a lot better.
Yeah, for sure. Not the easiest path so far through the CDS weeks for these players. So, hoping to be able to pick up one here, especially coming into the halfway point, right? Like you want to end the halfway at, like on a positive note, and then, carry a little bit of momentum into the second half, and maybe pick up a few more wins in that back half to make it to the finals.
That is the goal, right? So we have 10 players in the series, and only 6 of them are going to end up making their finals. So the bottom 4 are going to be cut off. Being 1-3 right now definitely puts you at risk for that. But also, like, even for the players that have been doing really, really well, they're still going to be fighting throughout it because the top 2 players get a bye into semis. They will not have to compete in quarterfinals, which also guarantees them a piece of the prize pool. So like even week 9, if they're guaranteed to like make the top 6 cut, they're still going to be fighting for it, which I think is real sick.
There's incentives all the way along, which is always nice.
Now, looking at these rosters, neither of these rosters have changed since we were last sitting here, Aikado. Technically, it is Thursday. We're doing this a little earlier because of the opens, and because of that reason, trading deadlines for this week haven't passed yet. So we could see some roster changes potentially, and that may be something we want to talk about. But I think both of these players have seemed like pretty confident in how they're building their roster so far. And what immediately stands out to you when we look at this matchup?
We had talked so much last week about the stuff available for L Games BR, whether it's the triple fearsomes, whether it's the Hecarim Zed, whether it's the Azir Irelia. There's a lot of different ways that they can go about building their lineup. And looking at the lineup that they built for last week, I would not have expected the direction that they went. Azir Hecarim was not on my bingo card with Fallen Sand Soldier, the big 7-drop that everyone forgot about. And then like a burn deck and an Nivea deck. They weren't able to pick up the win, but it's interesting that they continue to diversify sort of what decks they're able to bring, which, again, we talked about how it might pay dividends later on because it's basically impossible to prep for L Games here, but yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think despite being 1-3, L Games is one of my players that I really like to watch and see what they do, for reasons that you just stated above. But that roster that he brought, he said he brought it because he was targeting Jay Sensational's Yasuo deck, which was funny because Jay Sensational didn't bring Yasuo last week. He instead targeted Azir Irelia, which didn't come either. So that is just like what happens when you are up against L Games BR.
Yeah, 100%. You know, on the other side, we have Slay's lineup where, you know, I think if they brought literally 4 decks this entire time and are just cycling through them, you know, it's the Kayn Aatrox, it's the dragons, you know, whether that's Cosmic Call or actual dragons, you know, it seems like it's a coin flip, and then Nora Seraphine. And then I think that they have like a Viego game or something. But yeah, no, it is interesting. We sort of have, you know, the clash here of, you know, just the most flexible lineup on the planet that changes every single week versus the lineup that does not change at all.
Which certainly gives L Games a bit of an advantage, I would say, when it comes to prep. Though, as Slay has proven last week, like that may not mean anything. We talked a little bit about how actually the match between Slay and Bust last week was, I believe, the one game that we disagreed on when we were talking about matches last one. And you ended up coming up on top, predicting Slay's win. And I was down there on Bust because I was like, oh, Bust is a lot more flexible with his game plan and like adapting his lineup. And that just didn't prove enough to overcome Kayn Aatrox last week.
Yeah, no, Slay's lineup, if you don't have the right tools to deal with it, it can be a little bit hard. You know, it's very good at beating aggression. And I think that Bust's lineup, you know, almost anything that he was putting together was going to be relatively aggressive. So you can see a world where Slay's able to come on top there. But, you know, against L Games has so many different strategies and so many different ways to approach you know, building a lineup that I think it's going to be hard for Slay. If Slay ends up bringing the same thing again, I mean, it feels like almost certainly you're going to get like hard targeted. You're going to end up in some absolute miserable matchup that you just can't win.
How well do you think, because I know that you have like a good number of Seraphine hours, Seraphine bar hours. How good do you think Seraphine does into like a lot of the like more common decks that you would expect from L Games? Like, I don't know, Azir Aurelia or like Ephemerals or stuff like that?
Azir Aurelia is usually, you know, relatively fine, though I imagine a lot of that comes down to the fact that Azir Aurelia usually has to like respect, you know, aggro or respect, you know, the existence of a meta outside of the specific game that it's playing. So when you build Azir Aurelia, you know, you can't just like all in on a bunch of protection spells, right? But the moment you start playing a bunch of protection spells, it's a lot harder for stuff like Piltover's on to really deal with stuff like Azir. Azir has 5 health. Like that guy is really hard to kill. And then even Irelia, if you know, like return her, she has a tune, she gives you mana back. Like you can really be punished for that. So like there might be a world where, you know, something like, you know, an Azir Irelia that's teched for these types of matchups comes in, you know, Hecarim Zed similarly, you know, it's not like Slay is going to end up bringing like an aggro lineup that you have to worry about. So I think you might be able to get, you know, a little bit targety with your techs and maybe end up in a stronger state because of it.
Yeah, potentially. So, I mean, we can argue about like what Slay could or should bring, but it seems like he has set the standard that he's probably going to bring pretty similar stuff throughout all of it. So I sort of want to focus on what, if you were sitting in L Games seat right now and this is what you had available to you, how would you approach this lineup?
You know, there's so many different ways to take it. You know, I don't know if like there's a super clear cut, like this is the strategy that will 100% be winning against against Slay. You know, there's I think that a big boy mid range is probably pretty good if you're just like trying to target Seraphine. Big thing would be, you know, making sure you don't bring like just aggro, like the Teemo burn deck that he's brought a couple times. You probably don't bring that one because like Kayn Aatrox is pretty good into that. Even Dragons is pretty good into that. You know, it's a little bit harder to find your way to win. I could see a world where it is like, you know, attacked Azir Aurelia, attacked Hecarim Zed, you know, where you're just trying to really abuse Piltover and Zon. But even then, like it's a little bit scary because historically, even when people talked about like counters to Azir Irelia, people would bring up something like dragons, which is something that the Slay has brought quite a bit. Whether or not it's really a counter is up in the air.
Sure.
But it's definitely one that you could feel pretty confident bringing. And then champions like Kayn, like potentially could be really good against Azir Irelia too. Flipped Kayn with Ross like would probably do pretty well there, but maybe you're able to grind it out. What I would suggest is if I were L Games, I would probably scrim a few of these matchups, play Azir Irelia into some of the stuff, because I think that if you get a better idea of specifically how you feel into the lineup that Slay's probably going to bring, I think that would probably be really valuable for him.
Yeah, and this is one of the opponents that you probably can get away with doing that sort of stuff and getting like the practice games in. I think that's quite an excellent call by yourself.
I think though, if I were to like just lock in a lineup, I think tech to Azir Irelia, tech Hecarim Zed, and then just Darius Nar. And I think that you're just going to make the Piltover and Zon player cry. You're going to play some Sky Splitters. You're going to play some Twin Disciplines, and like life's going to be rough.
Oh, that sounds that does sound miserable for PNZ, especially if you get the 2-drop in Hecarim Zed, the one that gives ephemerals +1/+1.
Yeah, the 2/3. Yeah, that card
Soul
is
something.
Obnoxious.
Soul Shepherd.
Yeah,
is that it?
Soul Shepherd. Yeah.
Yeah, that would I think be a huge detriment to.
I think a big thing in that type of matchup is if you're playing the control, oftentimes you're trying to remove ephemerals before the attack starts. That way they're not able to get like all their shark chariots, right? You try and like deny the ephemerals so that they don't get a bunch of ephemerals on the attack. So, if you are building a lineup and you're like, I really want to beat Piltover and Zon, maybe you bring like extra copies of Foyer, which is the landmark that's like summoning a guy every single turn. Maybe you bring extra copies of like Dragon Ambush, because that's going to be an ephemeral attack that your opponent can't really interact with. I think that there's a lot of like tech options available to make life harder for Slay.
I think that's a real good advice right there. I hope he is listening, because that might very well be able to.
Imagine this is the week where they just don't bring Seraphine.
Oh, that would be insane. No, I feel like, Los Charlongas, he's got a mic on his little logo here. I feel like Seraphine's kind of like this guy's go-to champion. Like this was, let me remind you, Slay was pick 1, first pick Seraphine in the draft. I feel like he's bringing Seraphine every week.
A man after my own heart, I think we talked about it before. We talk about Slay's lineup every time. It's like Kayn Aatrox, Dragons. I feel like Viego Nora is something that he probably should have played at some point. I feel like Riven Quinn is something that he probably should have played at some point. Riven Quinn, I think, could be like a really strong deck that like really blows people out, where you just go like Cataclysms on your Riven. You get a really big, she has like 10,000 attack with Overwhelm, and then you just attack multiple times. You rally with some scout units. Like, I think that there's like a reasonably aggressive or a reasonably different look that Slay could have here with their lineup. It's just funny that they don't feel the need to do that.
Yeah. Well, they definitely still have a shot regardless. We're not too late in the season yet, but who knows, if this week does end up turning out bad for him and he realizes that he's really got to pick things up quickly if he wants to still make finals cut, we might see a few things changing around. Who knows?
Yeah, might also just end up taking it down. Sometimes Kayn Aatrox gets there.
Absolutely. We did see that last week.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
As we finish discussing this matchup, who do you think is going to come out on top in this match that we're looking at?
I feel like I got to give the edge to the flexibility from L Games. Until Slay shows me that they're going to bring a different lineup, I'm just going to assume that if someone has the tools to beat their lineup, that they're going to. But it's definitely a it's definitely a toss-up. There's definitely there isn't like a super clear cut, this is the way you beat Slay with L Games lineup, right? So it definitely could be close.
Absolutely, yeah. I had to go with you there as well, because L Games, I just really enjoy his innovation. I really enjoy watching him attack different rosters and the way he does it. And even though he doesn't have like a incredible record, I think a lot of his losses have been like very close, and honestly due to like some brilliant play by their opponents as well. So I think he still has everything that he needs to definitely make a name for himself in this competition, and I am 100% agreeing with you here.
For sure.
Moving on to the next one. This is a little bit more of not so much two players around the same score, but we've got Bust, who is also 1-3 right now. Just lost to Slay, gave Slay his first win last week, up against Shodox, who for the most part has been performing outstandingly throughout this series. Bust recently acquired Braum into his roster, traded Samira for Braum, so he's got an extra Freljord champion now. We'll see what he does with that. Shodox hasn't made a trade since the previous week where he recently acquired Lissandra, so it's going to be interesting to see how this turns out. What are your first thoughts?
I mean, a run on Freljord champions, it seems like everyone's trying to pick them up, especially with the changes, Endure got buffed, as well as, the new Bodir card. There's good reasons to be in Freljord right now. So not too surprising there. Braum, historically, not the strongest champion on the planet, but Lulu Braum is actually like a Warden deck that was really good last time Eternal was around, like a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. So, potentially an angle there for Buzz. Otherwise, I imagine Braum will just be picked for region if he doesn't end up in a pile like that.
I do know that Bust does still like his Warden decks despite even the nerfs. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that the death of Warden was greatly exaggerated. Mm-hmm. Warden is still very playable. Maybe a little bit less so in Eternal, but especially in Standard, like Warden, you make it to turn 9 pretty often. You ramp a little bit, and I think that you could bring a list like that to this type of thing, if nothing else, to have a different look for your lineup. Right? We've talked about how Bust's whole plan coming into this, the first few weeks, was just like timelines, tons of timelines, tons of timelines, and then since then, seemingly a little bit of identity crisis after timelines ends up eating a really big nerf. So I do like that they have like a slightly different look with their lineup. Could potentially even just go like double ramp. They have a couple Freljord units. They could just like ramp into She Wanders or something. And there's definitely there's potential there. I like that there's more flexibility now.
Yeah, definitely still like really hurting from the missing of Shadow Isles to like give you that like endure list that you were talking about more recently. But yeah, the thing about L Games that kind of about their roster, I should say, that kind of bothers me, or did I say L Games? I meant to say Bust.
Okay.
About Bust is that Bust's roster sort of tells me, even though they're not bringing the same decks every week, even though it's hard to see like exactly what they might bring, no matter what Bust brings, I'm pretty sure it's going to do like similar things most of the time. And I think that's why Slay was able to like really get a advantage over him, because Kane Aatrox beats most of the things that Bust was trying to do last week.
Yeah, it's pretty aggressively slanted across the board. It's like these low to mid size, unit decks that are just throwing a bunch of stuff at you. And yeah, the Warden deck last week was LeBlanc Trundle, which is, certainly an interesting take on Warden. So, potentially double Warden coming through this week. That could be exciting. I think that the important thing, though, is that, it feels like Bust is moving a little bit out of the shell of just, like very low to the ground aggro. Mm-hmm. Even brought a tree deck, so maybe just trying to diversify what you have to prepare for, which I think, again, is something that, may not get you the win in the week, but gives you value down the line when everyone has to prep against you.
Agreed. And I think that is one of the things that makes Shodox and the Canadian Chime Slime so strong, because every one of their champions is a threat in like different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Shodox has a ton of really strong champions, a ton of really strong looks that you can go with, whether it's super aggressive, whether it's value oriented, whether it's big mid range. He has a lot going for him. And that type of flexibility gives him a lot of advantage against somebody who has a little bit less, because he's able to attack their lineups from so many different angles. And I think that Shodox has done a really good job of being creative with the champions that he has in order to find like some sort of an edge there. And yeah, we've talked about Shodox's lineup so many times. I feel like it's just really well rounded. It's just a good lineup.
Yeah, he does seem to just like, and he doesn't have like all the regions that he might want. We've talked a bit about like how we think Bandle would still work like really well in his roster before. Like, he can utilize a lot of these champions. It's also not just like the champions in the regions that he has and like the strength of those champions, but the way that his champions can be utilized in so many different ways. Victor can go into like any P and Z deck really, and just like, even if he doesn't really fit the theme of what you're trying to do, you might just play a Victor, hit the right keywords and win. You've got Lux, which like definitely suggests like a spell heavy deck, but could be in like a barrier deck with Shen, or just be used to give you like cataclysms and barriers for like a Renekton Demacia deck, or with Alawi. Like, he has, and he used Elise against Torment in week 3 to like make a mill deck, which is just not what you would expect, but like the champion just fits in very well. And I think that shows a lot of the power of like the champions that he specifically drafted, to the point where I think a
lot of flexibility kind of in the game plan. Elise fits into aggro or mid-range or control. Annie fits into aggro or mid-range or control. Victor fits into aggro or mid-range or control. Like, even just in, the champion spread and the region spread, even within the champions, like, they're very flexible in terms of like what you want to do with them, which again, just gives him so much advantage when he's actually preparing and actually building a lineup. That's it. Specifically against what Bus is doing. If Bus is bringing like a bigger mid-range style of lineup, you might have trouble from Shodox's side. You can't really go that much bigger. The control options that you have available aren't like incredible against, like Warden style decks. It'll be interesting to see how he approaches trying to deal with that. I think that there's definitely options available. Annie Jin, aggro is usually pretty good into Warden. And then even, like the mill deck, right? You might be able to just stall them out long enough. Or you could just go like Elise Victor and pretend that it's Teemo, for like that full burn deck. Like, there's definitely options available, but I think it's a little bit less clear cut this week for Shodox compared to some in the past, where, it's a little bit harder to see what exactly his plan should be to be beating what Bus is going to bring.
That's very interesting. I was not thinking about it like that. So if you're Shodox, and I know we've talked about how we're like fans of Shodox's lineup, how do you approach what you think Bust is going to bring?
It's hard to say. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to say, because like bringing something like Renekton is going to be kind of hard. Especially, is there a Bandle champion available? Can he get Bandle? We keep talking about it every time.
There is not a single Bandle champion that is up for grabs in the undrafted pool. All of them are owned by other champions. That being said, he could trade with another player. We've talked about him potentially trading with Majin Bey for Yumi, and how that might be assisting to him.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm trying to think of like, is there a way to go over Warden? Sort of like beat it, like not on board, but like beat it in like this, ephemeral sense. I'm thinking like a Glorious Evolution deck that could be fun. And then I'm looking at Renekton. I'm like, how do you play Renekton? Shellfolk. I was like, okay, maybe we can build Shrima Shellfolk, but then no Bandle. I was like, oh well, never mind then. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like the control option, like a lot of the Annie decks are going to have trouble actually dealing with all the threats, assuming that Bus does end up going for like this larger mid-range style of a lineup, and maybe he won't. But that's sort of what I feel like would be hard for Shodox to deal with. It's like this double Warden plus some Jarvan deck. Maybe even like, what about Jarvan Jax? That could be fun with like cataclysms, and you just like try and beat ass. I don't know. I think there's interesting ways to approach it that like maybe is hard for Shodox to deal with. What would Shotox do? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how he beats something like that.
Would you do like a like Lysandra Elise sort of like Shadow Owl's Freljord control sort of thing?
Maybe just like Ruinations, and Ruinations, a couple whales maybe. You could play Ramp. Okay, yeah, Bowdeer. Okay. I'm digging that. I like that idea. And then maybe there's like a Victor Glorious Evolution nonsense that like you could just win the game when you play Glorious Evolution. And then your third deck is maybe it's like the Shenalawi again. Maybe it's like Shenalawi, and you just try and like cheese out something elusive, or just play like barriers and try to win that way. It's a little bit less clear. I think that's the big thing here. But that said, like if Bust ends up bringing like the low to the ground aggro that he's brought in the past, whether it's like some maybe like a Poppy deck or a Tristana deck. Oh, did we cut out? Oh, maybe not. But yeah, I think if he ends up bringing something like that, then it's very easy for Shotox to beat.
Yeah, that's definitely something you get to be scared of if you are Bust. I'm assuming that the recent acquisition of Braum was taken with his next opponent into at least some consideration, potentially. Since it is his last undrafted trade, definitely thinking like longer term as well. But I'd have to imagine that he wouldn't have made that trade just now if he thought Samira would be better into Shotox than Braum.
Yeah, I think that the Braum is doing a lot of heavy lifting here to like push him out of this like low to the ground aggro style of like lineup. I think that just the fact that we're sitting here talking about a potential double Warden lineup, I think that's like the whole point of picking up Braum is that we have to sit here and talk about like, there being more options than just throwing a bunch of units at a bunch of small units at your opponent. Yeah.
Before we get to talking about who we think has the edge in this matchup and then moving on to the next one, I'd like to say something about what I'm hoping for, because it involves a little bit of not necessarily drama, but like a little bit of not gambling, a little bit of discourse between the Champion Draft Series staff community. We as a group sort of like pull together and decide what champions should be valued as like what before the draft begins. And none of us get like exactly what we think is like ideal, because we're all sort of like debating about it with each other. And that's sort of the point, right? Where it's like not all just like what I would think, but I have people like checking me and me checking things that I think are insane and stuff like that when we're coming up with those decisions. I was arguing for Lysandra to be rated higher than she was, because I think that Lysandra does a lot and gives you like a lot of options in any sort of deck that you're building, and can provide a lot of different kind of win conditions just on her own. And I told the guys, I told the team when we did the draft that I was like, you know what, I'm fine with Lysandra being at this point value that she is, because I'm going to watch one of these players get Lysandra in their roster and show you guys how much she's worth. So I'm really hoping that Shotox brings Lysandra and just like kicks ass with it, because that would be me feeling justified in what I have said.
Shotox is able to, have the prophecy come true and show just how broken the access to Freljord is, as well as Lysandra herself. Shotox definitely a champion with a lot of text. I think that it's impressive every time that you read the card. It's like, oh, there's more. Oh, the Ishard she makes this free. Oh, and top Nexus. Oh, and yeah, it's just the amount of things that she has on the card, right? Yeah, like, there's definitely a lot of things you can play for. There's a lot you could do with the card, and especially with like the recent buffs to Freljord, stuff like Bowdeer, especially, and a lot of the ramp strategies sort of coming to fruition. I think that Lysandra, is pretty well positioned for sure.
All right. Well, that being my little spiel, who do we think is going to come out on top in this match before we move on to the next one?
Oh, so much of it is just dependent on like what Bust ends up bringing. Because if Bust ends up going into like the big mid range, then like probably has a pretty good shot. But if they bring anything else, like I mean, it's just Shotox all the way. Um, I think I'm gonna lean towards believing in Bust bringing the double ward. They picked up the Braum for a reason. They're sort of in a renaissance where they're changing a lot of the way that they're approaching like building their lineups and building their decks, in the post timelines world. So I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith in Bust. I think they'll be able to pull it together here against Shotox.
All right. I completely agree with you that I think we're probably going to see like the lines of Warden from Bust, at least one, if not two, based off of his current draft. That being said, I'm going to disagree with you on this one and give it to Shotox. I think that Shotox has the tools at his disposal and is just like an excellent, well-rounded player that he can utilize all of these strong champions to come out on top. I think he's one of the players that we should keep our eyes on for finals, and I think he's got this one. I know that as far as like you and me choosing players when we've been in opposition, I haven't had a really good record with that, but I think things are going to turn around this time.
Yeah, this is where that goes on its head. I mean, I could definitely see a world where Shotox is able to pull it together, and like find, just think through all of the potential lineups and then find, the exact right one. And I could definitely see a world where he does that, but, bust or bust, right? And just gotta believe in him.
True that. All right. We are moving on to what I think is probably the most challenging match to talk about, which is like two of our most like flexible and adaptable players in Spids with the redeemed qualities and Cephalopod with Fosporo FC. Both of these players have access to almost every region. Both of these players are constantly changing their lineups. Both of them put in a lot of work to making sure that they're prepared for their opponent. But when you are Cephalopod or when you are Spids and you are looking at your opponent, you're looking at the decks that they've brought and you're looking at the champions that you have, what do you do?
And it's really hard, especially because there isn't even like a theme. I think that in last CDS, if you followed Spids' run during that, there was a theme to a lot of the stuff that she was building. It was, like this mid-range style of lineup where, the even if the decks are a little bit different, the win conditions are usually very similar. But I mean, this time around, like it's kind of off the wall. I've been really impressed with her ability to use Kennen. I think Kennen is a champion that, like, when I look at it, like Kennen's one of the weakest champions in the game. It usually requires high synergy and like doesn't do a whole lot. As a champion. So, you see it and it's like, okay, well, Spids probably didn't play Kennen that much, but Spids has brought Kennen every single week and has brought Kennen in a different deck every single week and in a totally different win condition every single week. And I think that, even looking at something like Spids' ability to use the champion as innocuous as Kennen to such great success has been really impressive. And I think that it makes it really hard to prepare it all for her. It's like she could bring literally anything any day, and it's like I don't know. I'm just gonna bring good decks and just hope that it gets me there. But I mean, you talk about all that flexibility. Cephalopod just as flexible. He's cooking every week.
Yeah, absolutely. Cephalopod, I would have to say, is probably like the king of tech as well. Like every week, or I should say every win that he's gotten, which has been like all but one match that he's played so far, you can look at how he's built his decks, and it's not just that like he's made like good decks into this matchup, but there's always like specific cards you can look at and be like, okay, this guy has pinpointed exactly the card that like completely destroys everything that you bring. Whether it was like the Explorers against Majin and his landmarks, or like last week when he said, hey, I'm going to run multiple culling strikes in Rumble just because it kills everything you care about.
Yeah, which was pretty funny. I caught the end of that series where the calling strike in Rumble, finding him the lethal. It's pretty funny, and he's willing to bring off the wall stuff. Ari Kindred, I don't think was ever going to be on one of my bingo cards for a deck that ends up getting put together. Yeah, no, it really is just the battle of two incredibly off the wall deck builders, and I think that a lot of the building that especially Cephalopod has done, as you said, it's very targeted, it's very teched, it's very much having a read on what your opponent's going to bring, and then bringing interesting things to beat it, like calling strike and rumble. So I think that it's a lot harder when you look at Spids. And it's like Spids has brought so many unique decks with so many different ways of winning the game. Like, I'm not sure if you have that silver bullet. I don't know if you have the 9x Explorer silver bullet. I don't know if you have the Culling Strike and Rumble silver bullet. I don't know if there's something like that that's going to be able to just give you that much of an edge over Spids.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we get to a point when these players are like prepping for their next week and it's just like so much of like, how do I even counter this, that you just sort of just say, fuck it, I'm going to bring the decks that I want to bring? Do you think it gets to that point?
I think that's probably where I would end up. You can like run through the circles over and over in your head of like, well, okay, Spids could bring this or bring this or bring this or bring this. Or, Cephalopod could bring like this mid-range. He could bring like this control. He could bring like this combo. He could bring like any of these types of decks. And if you get in the circles long enough, like, at the end of the day, like, it's going to be, it's relatively random in terms of what your opponent's going to bring. I think that the Cephalopod's best bet is probably just to bring like some big mid-range stuff that's pretty solid, just good decks, if that's like, Vayne Ornn and then like some Kindred deck that's pretty good into mid-range and, is pretty solid overall. I think that having like a higher power level deck is usually pretty good in these types of situations where like you can't just like hard target. But that's just on the assumption that like Spids is going to bring like normal shit, and Spids might not bring normal shit.
Mm-hmm. If I had to like predict something that both of these players would bring, I would probably say, I would probably put money that Spids is probably going to bring Gwen in some way, shape, or form. I think Spids loves Gwen. It did a lot of work for her last season. It's done a lot of work for her this season, except most of that work has been getting banned. And then if I had to look at Cephalopod has every region accessible, but he has 2 Ionian champions and tends to bring at least one of them every week. So you can maybe anticipate like a little bit of Ionia mumbo jumbo, but even that's a risk, right? To just go in too hard on that sort of targeting.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, the one consistent, it's 4 different Kennen decks that are all very different for Spids, but also 4 Gwen decks. 3 of them have been Draven Gwen, which is really just red Gwen. Mm-hmm. It's the Gwen that we've seen in the past of like Harrowings and Draven, or usually it's Katarina, but it's a deck you've seen before. So like maybe that's an angle on it, is trying to beat that. Also, Poro King brought both of the last weeks, so maybe there's an angle there. Maybe you can be like, okay, if I can be good into red Gwen and Poro King, maybe I find one of them. Maybe I end up finding one of the targets there. I do think that it's a very safe bet to say that, Spids is probably going to bring Gwen again. In terms of what actual pile that ends up being, it's hard to say. We talked about last week the potential of like a Neela Gwen, Gwen Fizz type of deck, where you're trying to abuse Hallowed on, these evasive units. That's definitely an option available. There's a lot on the table with a champion as flexible as Gwen.
Definitely. Also, on that note, Spids asked me to say that she actually doesn't have much Gwiz experience. We said that on the last show. She hasn't played much Gwen Fizz, so that wouldn't be a deck archetype that she's quite familiar with.
Okay, I mean, yeah, that's what she would say if we were giving away her tech on the stream. She'd be like, "Okay, come on, don't give it away like that."
Okay.
Did she not play it? I thought she did.
I think her Fizz mastery is like 2.
Yeah, that's because you don't get mastery from friend challenges. She just plays in tournaments and such.
Okay. All right. I will not let it be noted. I'm not challenging either force here. But yeah, this is such a hard matchup to like predict. We've been like going at crumbs here as far as like what these guys might bring. Like Cephalopod, pretty much anything, probably an Ionian deck. Spids, pretty much anything, probably a Gwen deck of some sort.
I think Kindred will show up. I think there will definitely be a Kindred deck. In terms of what it is, like, after he just brought like, Kindred Ari, like, I'm not going to try and sit here and tell you exactly what Kindred deck is going to be, but I do think there's going to be a Kindred deck. It feels like Kindred's just like pretty good into most of what Spiz is doing.
That's fair.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, you could just bring Echo Zillion. Echo Zillion is usually pretty good into a lot of mid-range stuff, specifically Demacia, but it's still pretty good into other mid-range as well because, it's hacking into a Scrying Sands and an Echo at some point is just going to be miserable. Maybe there's options. Vayne, Ornn, Zillion, Echo, Kindred, something. Maybe that's like a lineup, but maybe like Kindred Set. Can you make Kindred Set work? Pretend that it's like, Karma.
How
There's options.
If you're Cephalopod, how scared are you of Plunder?
How scared am I of Plunder? I think that I could probably build like a lineup that's probably like pretty fine in Plunder. Like, Plunder's the type of deck that usually aren't getting crushed by and usually aren't crushing. It's a very, like 52% across the board type of deck. And as long as you're bringing like reasonable decks, if you start digging into, you're really cooking. If you're really cooking, you might end up bringing something that's like really bad to Plunder. But it's something to keep in the back of your head. She's brought it twice. She brought it to the first 2 weeks and then hasn't brought it since. So, probably something that's, in the back of your mind though.
Certainly. All right. So as far as we're concerned, I know that it's kind of up in the air, but like, who are we anticipating to come out on top in this matchup?
Gosh, it's so hard.
It's challenging. It really is. Should I like flip a coin?
That might be accurate. It's so hard to say. I feel like Cephalopod might be able to find an angle on this. Both these players are really good, and not just really good at the game, but also really good at abusing this format. And sort of taking their lineups and making the most out of them. So either way, it's going to end up being a banger match. But I definitely, I'm leaning towards maybe Cephalopod pulling it out. Maybe he finds the angle. Maybe he just brings like solid enough decks. But at the end of the day, it really is a toss up.
Here's my prediction. All right. Okay. I think that when it comes to like lineups, like who brings like the better lineup into the other player, I think Cephalopod is going to win. I sort of anticipate that. However, I think that Spids will take this match in game 3.
You think she's just going to skill diff it?
So I'm going to look at sort of like how these players have performed throughout this season. Cephalopod has like we've already talked about like how great he is at like building rosters that are good into you, at like taking specifically against you, but he has sometimes made like a few critical errors against his opponents in regards to what might be more convenient or beneficial for him utilizing his roster conveniently. We can look at like the previous week where the only deck that he actually showed this off in his video and called it a misplay himself. So I am by no means like criticizing him. I'm actually just quoting him. He mentioned how like the only deck that had like a good win rate into any of the decks that he brought from Sir Termund was the Bandletree deck, because that could actually handle his Rumble pretty well. And he left it up, and that ended up like getting him it ended up taking him to game 3 instead of like being like an easy 2-0. Where on the other side, I have seen Spids come out ahead in matchups she like really shouldn't be winning, or like definitely has to like fight uphill to like get there. I think that when the cards are set on the table, that Cephalopod will have the advantage. But I think just based off of what we've seen from both players this season, I think Spids has the edge.
Okay. Okay. I can see it. I can see it.
We'll have to come back. I may just be like cursing all of the players that I am like fighting for right now, as Shodox brought up recently. We'll have to see. If that ends up being the case, I'm just gonna let you make all the calls next week onward, and I'm just gonna keep my damn mouth shut. But until that happens, I'm gonna put my thoughts out there. But yeah, we'll go on to the next match, which is Sir Termint, who is currently, I believe, 2-2, versus Grandpa Roji and the Extrusive Elementals, who is currently 1-3.
Yeah, 1-3. Obviously coming off of a hard week, I think, both of these players just played the last two players, right? They both played Cephalopod and Spids. So it was definitely, it was a hard week for both of them. And, wanting to come back and pick up a win here would be a little bit nice. I think that Roji, even though he didn't win last week, threw out a curveball in his lineup, right? Went back to the Cosmic Call.
Yeah.
Yeah, despite the nerfs, just saying that, like, okay, I know that this is going to hard target my mid-range stuff. What if I just play Cosmic Call anyway? Which I like that he's thinking outside the box. I like that he's, sort of putting it out there as an option so that his opponents have to think about it, right? He's not as face up, as he otherwise might be. But if you do it, you kind of have to pick up a win at some point, because if you don't, then people aren't going to respect it, right?
Sure. I think that's absolutely fair.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, on the other side, Sir Termund has had an average success throughout the season. Definitely had some really strong wins and some really devastating losses. Hasn't been completely crushed in any match so far, but definitely would like to see a 3-1 or a 4-0 in his current record instead of the current 2-2, which is still, I'd say, a little up for grabs. You still have to fight for a few more wins if you want to guarantee yourself a spot in the finals. Recently acquiring Caitlyn for his roster, which I think is big, having 2 P and Z decks now. Also utilized Vlad last week for just the Noxus splash in a Bandletree deck with Vagar. I think that was something that we mentioned in one of our earlier discussions. So definitely still innovating now that Cosmic Call has been nerfed and utilizing more of his options.
Yeah, definitely an interesting take there. Another thing that's opening up your options. Once you see Tree, you have to be a little bit scared. Tree is the type of deck that if you're not ready for it, can just blow you out. One thing I will say is that, picking up the PNC is a pretty good region, a lot of flexibility. I like a lot of deck building in PNC, but this is not the week where you really want to go double PNC, I don't think. Against Grandpa Roji, who brings all these big mid-range decks that sort of, exist to punish the existence of Piltover and Zon. I don't think that it could be really hard to build a lineup that's not getting crushed by the face up, level 1 strategy of Roji, which is, just throw Malphite and Varus and Pantheon at you.
Yeah, a little Ezreal or a little Twisted Fate isn't going to do much against blocking against a bunch of those bad boys swinging in, huh?
I think that's the big thing, yeah, is Ezreal TF is a deck that obviously Termint has liked a lot. It's very similar to a deck that's very good on ladder right now. So it has had, pretty decent success with it, likes this deck. The issue is I don't think that this deck has anything that can deal with anything that Roji's dealing with or that Roji's bringing to the table. So it might be the week for Termin to, sort of go outside of the box here and, step away from the Ezreal and try and find another direction to sort of attack this big mid-range that Roji is likely to bring.
Do you think that means Volibear is going to come out?
I would expect Volibear, yeah. It's like a Volibear Vlad type of thing. It could be the Otacon ramp. That's an option. And then there's probably going to be an Aphelios deck, and then maybe he brings this Maokai deck again, because he's brought it a couple times. It got banned once, and I think it got a win in the other one, right? He's brought it 3 times. He likes his deck.
He has grown very fond of the Maokai Evelyn Mill deck to a varying amount of success, I would say. It definitely was hard for him to use in the last week versus Cephalopod. Now, Cephalopod, we talked about how we sort of like targeted him, said like, hey, like Coaling Strike, Soul Harvest, what are you going to do about these cards? You can't really do much. But it's definitely been a struggle. It's just sort of like the thing that the toss mechanic does to you is that like sometimes the vengeances that you need, sometimes the watery graves that you need, sometimes the pings that you need, they just all get tossed and discarded to the side. You're never going to find them, right? That's just one of the risks of the deck.
Yeah, especially, not just that you lose it because, a lot of people are like, oh, those cards are at the bottom of your deck anyway. You were never going to find them. But an important thing is, if you're someone like Roji and you're playing like these big mid-range decks and you see your opponent toss 2 vengeances, and now it's like, oh, I can just go all in. I don't have to worry about vengeance. Like, I mean, I just saw you toss 2 of them. Even if you weren't going to draw them anyway, just the mentally knowing that your opponent doesn't have it, I think can be, really valuable.
Definitely. And that is something that has definitely come to bite him in previous weeks, though he has.
I think it's something that's come to bite, every Maokai player ever. It's just sort of, it comes with the territory.
It's true.
I do think, though, that like Tournament has, especially the Volibear. I think like Volibear Vladimir is like a very reasonable bring. I think that this is like a solid deck that would end up doing pretty well against a lot of what Roji wants to bring. And then maybe it's like an Aphelios TF angle. You just try and like outvalue or like go big. I don't know. There's definitely options available to him.
What if you did like Ezreal Twisted Fate again, but it was like an elusive deck?
Okay. Elusives historically very good against Roji. Roji mind booms the moment he cues into aggro or elusives. So if you're able to bring those, it might give you some advantage. Mm-hmm. No access to Ionia, so missing out on that elusives. But maybe we could go Bandle Targon.
Sure.
Just pretend that we're playing the Zoe elusives deck. Mm-hmm. You might be cooking.
We'll see how that ends up working out. As far as Roji goes, I mean, he has limited regional access, but we have seen that he's been able to like vary it up into like maybe bring Cosmic Call or Elites. He's been trying really hard to bring Xerath Ziggs the last few weeks, and it just keeps getting banned. We don't really get to see it in action. And then he's got like his classics. So what do you think Roji would prefer in this sort of matchup? Is this like a classic Roji Talia Malphite sort of roster you're looking into, or do you think you have to get a little bit more creative?
Well, I think that, the Xerath is something he keeps bringing because Roji loves Xerath. Xerath Zillion is one of his favorite decks that he plays like every single Eternal. Every time we come back, he like, jams his 20, 30 games on it. And then he's like, okay, that was, I got my fix. So I wouldn't be surprised, if in this format he continues to try and bring Xerath. But in this, if you assume that Tournament is like, addicted to the Twisted Fate decks, addicted to the Ezreal decks, I think this is just, like a level 1 week for Roji. You bring the classics, you bring cultists, you bring a Pantheon deck, and then your third deck, live life. It could be Elites, it could be Xerath, it could be Talia Malphite. The world is your oyster, and, you are, I think you're ready to shuck. Just bring the good decks, and I think that you'll be pretty favored.
All right, well, heard it here first. Not too much effort needed on Roji's side, assuming that we have what you would expect from Sir Tournament here. Definitely don't want to see Roji get like too much into his own head over like some of the last few weeks. Like he's got some decks that he's really strong with, and we'd like to. It'd probably be good to see him like really utilize them in this series.
Yeah. I keep looking at Roji's lineup and I'm like, what could he cook? He has access to the Bandle. Maybe there's like a tree. Maybe there's like, an aggro lineup. Maybe there's something that he can do to shake it up. And I take a peek at the available regions on the left and it's like, no Noxus, no PNZ, no Ionia, no Freljord, no Shadow Isles. Okay, what regions do we have? It feels very limiting. Obviously, he's been able to build quite a few different decks within these regions, but yeah, I think that limited is just sort of the way to describe his lineup.
Definitely, and it does make like a little bit of a target on his back, which he has been able to escape before, but it's still a pretty big target.
For sure.
All right, who do we think is going to take the edge in this match?
I feel like a lot of it's just gonna come down to if Tournament is able to find, like the right third deck or the right lineup that's gonna be favored into what Roji wants to bring. I think it's going to be an SI deck. It's going to be a Failure deck. That third deck is just going to be the elusive one. And, I think that he might be too addicted to Ezreal Twisted Fate. I'm going to give the edge to Roji here. I think that Roji has the tools, has the decks available to be favored into Tournament. I think I would lean that direction.
Okay. I think I will just go ahead and lean the opposite direction in this one and say I think that Sir Tournament is going to pull out some really creative stuff. I think we're going to see like a roster from Sir Tournament. I know that he has been liking the Twisted Fate Ezreal, but I think that like when you look at someone like Roji, who has even before Explorers were introduced, so much landmark removal accessible to him, I think that like Bandle Tree and like Sunken Temple decks become less enticing.
Yeah. Lots of attractive options, definitely. When your opponent is shown that they are willing to destroy your landmarks, your all-in landmark decks become just a little bit less consistent.
Sure.
I think a lot of it's just gonna come down to like whether or not Tournament can get away from what he has been playing. Whereas I feel like for Roji, it's just go back to the classics.
That's fair. All right. Going into our last match of the week. Whoa. Excuse me. Oh, there we go. All right. We're going to the Windswept Warriors versus the Ionian Idiots. This is a classic Mastering Runeterra matchup that we've got here. Jason Sensational versus Majin Bay.
Yeah, definitely a classic. And, both these players have very similar play styles. I feel like, they're both big Ionia lovers. They both love like their value decks. And, it is sort of a clash of similar styles, I feel like, this week.
I feel like Majin wishes he had Jason's roster. Maybe not the Galio, but like...
There's definitely a lot of, champions there. You see the Lee Sin, you see the Karma, you see even the Fizz and the Janna. There's definitely a lot of champions there that Majin is a big fan of. That said, Majin has stuff that he's a big fan of as well. Still has that Rise. And I feel like Rise kind of single-handedly is very good into a lot of what Jason's trying to bring.
That being said, I think that Jason has, while not being like the most creative player in our pool of like making like the most like wild, wacky cooking decks like that we talked about earlier is probably Cephalopod. That being said, he has really impressed me personally with not only how he adjusts his decks into his opponent, but also like how he adapts over the course of the match. Like if you saw him playing against L games beforehand, he lost the Shadow Owls PNZ Burn Mirror that was between him. It was his Nocturne Janna versus L Games Callista Teemo, and he ended up losing that mirror. But then he said, all right, I actually have realized that this Azir deck that L Games is bringing is like really weak into fearsomes, so I'm gonna mulligan very hard for like Nocturne and Stygian, and like you saw him like churning that during game 2, getting ready for game 3, and it's just it has really impressed me how he like adapts into his opponent even like in the middle of a match.
Yeah, that can be really helpful, especially, if you start out, a little bit down, being able to adjust and come back is definitely nice. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a good point. Majin, Majin's lineup. I feel like we talked about Majin's lineup last time. And, nothing's changed. And it's very much like a story of a lot of decks that have sort of, like had their teeth removed. And there's not, it's hard to see the world where Majin is like, his lineup just looks so much worse than it was like, a month ago, right? Like Jace Heimersby looking worse, no Cosmic Call. These types of options that, he might have had previously just like aren't around right now, right?
Yeah, I want to take a moment because we've got Shakomal in chat, I hope I pronounced that right, I probably didn't, who's saying like we've got the lineup of like Susan Thresh, Jace Donger, and then Rise, and then either like Zoe Nami. The issue with that, with how the Champion Draft Series works, is that in the Champion Draft Series, when you build a deck, in order to utilize a region's cards, you have to have a champion from that region in your deck, which is why we have like the whole region access stuff in the bar here. If Majin wants to do like a Shadow Owls version of Heimer Jace, they need to put like one copy of Thresh there, which is probably like one less copy of Heimer. And then that means that you're not playing Nasus Thresh and you're coming up with something else for that. And then I believe Aikado, we've talked before about how we just don't expect personally like a Zoe Nami elusive sort of deck from Majin.
I feel like, when every time we look at his lineup, I look at something like Zoe Yumi. I think Zoe Yumi is one of the best decks that he could bring. I think that it is incredibly good into a lot of what people are bringing. I think that it's very strong. These Battle Bond style Blessing of Targon buffs onto elusives is like really strong. The issue is that Majin hates that deck, and he hates these style of decks. And it's like, it's so funny because when you're prepping against Majin, you look at that and it's like, damn, that is a little bit scary. It would be very worrisome were Majin actually bring it. And maybe someday he ends up, just pulling the trigger on it. But it is just so far out of the wheelhouse of like expected Majin style decks. That said, Jace Heimer, Shadow Owls is the traditional one. Mm-hmm. I think Bandle is actually pretty okay. Condense is a card that we played for a while to copy Hex Tech Handler. There's also Minimorph is a 6-mana spell. What's the new Puff Cap card? Or it's not new, but it got buffed. No, the 6-mana one that got buffed from 7 mana to 6 mana. Eclectic Collection. Eclectic Collection is pretty good with Heimerdinger because usually you can go 6 wide, and now it's a 6-mana spell, so it gives you an elusive, which is usually the good one. There's definitely merit to some of these style of options, and like Heimerdinger is dual region, so you can just play Jace Heimer Bandle and like not have to worry about cannibalizing your Nasus Thresh deck. But yeah, it's hard when like some of like the candid decks here, if we look at like Thresh Nasus, it's one of the strongest decks that Majin has, and like has access to and probably could bring. I think that Thresh Nasus is going to have a hard time into Jason's decks. Jason sort of brings a lot of things that are very good into that style of, like this aggressively slanted, atrocity reliant deck. If you start trying to play that into Yasuo, start trying to play that into, a lot of like the Janna decks he's going to be able to build, or like a Katarina deck, I think you're going to have a lot of trouble.
I wanted to throw something out there. Wanted your thoughts on it. Seeing as what you just pointed out about Thresh Nasus not being like the best deck into what Jason's bring, how do you feel about Spooky Ash into Jason's roster?
Spooky Ash is pretty funny. Spooky Ash is pretty funny. If you feel like you have the late game, it is kind of a crapshoot in terms of what Jason's actually going to bring, but like freezes are pretty good against Katarina style decks. If they're trying to go like the Katarina Yasuo, if it's Katarina control, then, a little bit less so. But even the Katarina control decks, those like Noxus control decks are usually very bad to Shadow Owls. So there's a chance that like Ash, again, it's a style of deck that like I can't see Majin ever bringing. It's just not his style at all. But I do think that it could be like a strong option available to him that like probably would be pretty hard for Jason to deal with.
Yeah, for me, it's just like if I was in Majin's shoes, this is something that I'd be looking at, because it's like, okay, Yasuo historically like really struggles with frostbites because you frostbite him and suddenly his stuns don't do anything, especially once he's leveled up. Jason, I don't think has yet to bring Lee Sin, but Lee Sin, that's like one of the ways to immediately stop his attacks for the turn is just like bring his attack down to nothing. Like you have to like get into like this real mind game of like saving your buff spells for like post frostbite if you want to like do anything against that sort of style. Udyr pumping up, just frostbite him, stuns him for a while. Fearsome units don't mean anything if they have 0 attack. It just kind of like really sucks against Formidable, and that's like the one thing that like kind of is scary about bringing that deck into a roster. But if like Formidable is something that you're willing to ban, I don't know, might be interesting.
Even against Galio, if you do run into Galio, you are in that Shadow Isles region, and that Shadow Isles region has Quietus, Soul Harvest, Eradication.
True.
You have a lot of cards that are weirdly enough pretty good into Galio, and if you can end up flipping Ash, none of their cards can block anyway. You don't have to freeze any of them; they all have 0 attack. So I do think that I do think it's a very reasonable call out. I think it's a very reasonable option for Majin to bring. If Majin really, just surprised us all and brought, like spooky Ash and like Nami, or not Nami, but like Zoe Yumi and like third deck, like if he surprised us and brought like the good decks, I'd be astounded. I would be like, oh shit. It would instantly make him much harder to prep for the rest of the tournament, because he showed that he's willing to play stuff that's outside of his wheelhouse, and like potentially could be really strong into the style of stuff that Jason has. Jason has strong decks and a strong sort of identities, but like a lot of them are going to have trouble into Spooky Ash. A lot of them are going to have trouble into these really massive elusives. Yeah, it is funny. It is funny. I feel like there's so much available to Majin, but because I've watched hundreds of hours of Majin content, I'm like, nah, there's no way. There's no way he brings that.
Well, I am very open to Majin surprising us on this week against Mr. J Sensational. I also don't think it's going to happen, especially because like the day of the match. Oh, by the way, for those who are looking at the date on the match on the top of the screen, this is Tuesday. Most of our matches are usually on Monday, but this is a Tuesday match. So if you're going to try to catch that, that is not going to be on Monday like our matches normally are, because Monday Majin's going to be on a plane all day.
Majin right now out of the country, off playing, Flesh and Blood Worlds. Imagine, and not spending all your time playing Legend and Terra. Come on, bro.
Yeah, so he's and I think that him like being on a plane and all of that is probably going to be another reason why I don't think he's going to be like too adapting in this upcoming week. I'm very open to Majin proving me wrong. I would love for Majin to prove me wrong here.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely would be an option available. Jason, though, I feel like there's pretty reasonable ways to go about this. I think that if you just wanted to like hard target Rise, I think there's like a 90% chance that Majin brings Rise. In terms of what that looks like, it's probably like Formidables. It's probably like some control deck with a ton of landmark removal. Like you could probably find sort of a lineup that's going to end up being pretty good into Rise if you just like assume that he's bringing Rise. Yeah. Maybe it's the return of Nico.
The return of Nico. He played Nico last week in a Formidable deck, without like any real way to like level Nico. I think like you're guaranteed to like maybe get like 3 out of 6 leveled up for her in his deck. He was just like, I'm playing Nico because it's House Spider, and that just like really helps me in this upcoming matchup, which like is like a great utilization of the champion, I'd say.
It's actually so funny. He came into my chat and he's like, did you see my lineup? And I was like, no, I didn't see it. And he's like, he links it to me, and I'm like, okay, why the fuck are we playing Nico? And he's like, Nico is House Spider. I was like, okay, but Nico's not House Spider. Nah, bro, Nico's House Spider. And it's like, okay, I guess Nico's House Spider. What the?
He did get House Spider against L Games, so I guess it ended up working out for him. Anyways, oh, you know what? Do you think we see? I don't think we've seen much Fizz from.
Yeah, he brought it in the Glorious Evolution deck a couple weeks back, right?
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, Fizz is very much just for regions. I feel like in his lineup, there isn't going to be like an all-in Fizz deck. I don't think he doesn't really have like the tools available to do that. I don't.
That being said, I think Fizz is a really annoying champion to face if you're playing like Majin style decks.
Yeah, for sure. Unless you bring Ash. Frostbites are pretty good against Fizz because he can't dodge them at least. You
could play like
there could Fizz be Udyr. Like a Fizz Udyr, yeah. Pretend that the stances are Yumi. Just a Bone Club. We Rico, we Rex. I could see it. Would
be rather funny. All right. So last match of the week, technically Tuesday, not Monday. But how do you think this is going to fall out?
I gotta give the edge to Jason. I just feel like Jason's more flexible and like has a better read on what Majin's gonna bring. Maybe I'll message Majin and be like, okay, bro, we need to build you a lineup that actually does something instead of just bringing your Rise every week.
Maybe we'll see how that works out for you and Majin and what I've heard is Coach Puffball Panda and how they've been.
Maybe Puffball. Okay, what I need to do is message Puffball. He's the one who will get stuff done. Okay.
Well, we'll see how that works out. I am actually going to agree with you on Jason, not just because of what we talked about with Majin's lineup, but also just because he has, over the course of this season, really impressed me by like his takes on how to beat his opponent, both in the deck building stage and in the gameplay stage.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, that said and done, we have finished this pregame show. A few things that I want to say. First of all, I have done something now that I probably should have done like 2 or 3 weeks ago by now, but like the players in the series that post like their matches to their YouTube channels and stuff, on the Champion Draft Series channel now, we now have playlists of all of their videos. So if you want to just like run through each of these players' videos game by game, definitely still follow those players so that you can get those games when they come out if you want to. But you can also just go to our channel and find like all the games. So if you want to like watch like L Games' matchup versus Jason, I don't think Jason usually releases his videos on like Friday or Saturday, so we'll see how that falls in. But you could like watch one and then the opposing perspective or both at the same time, and it's all like right there, easily accessible for you. The other thing I want to announce is less of an announcement and more of an announcement of an announcement, but I have something really exciting for the Champion Draft Series that when we do this show next week, I will hopefully be able to announce. And the show is going to be where I first announce it, before anywhere else, before the Discord channel, before anywhere like on YouTube or anything. Like this is going to be the place to be for the first announcement. It's been something I've wanted to do with the Champion Draft Series since I like initially conceived the idea, and I'm really excited to bring it out for the public. So look forward to that. Mr. Aikado, anything else that you want to say?
No, not at all. Excited for the announcement. I'll be looking forward to that one.
I am looking forward to that too. I've still got a little bit of work to get us there, but that's just something I'm going to be working on this weekend. This show is also like I've been paying close attention to chat. This show is also like sort of supposed to function a bit as like a Q&A where like if chat wants to like ask anything directly about the Champion Draft Series or like put themselves out there, that look, I'm totally willing to like stop in the middle of the stream and like if you've got like a question about the series, how we do things, how you can learn more, like I want to be there. Part of the reason I wanted to do this stream was to like give the viewers more chances to like interact with the Champion Draft Series directly, and like if they have any questions or something, get that like answered directly. So
questions, or if you want to talk shit on Majin too, if you're
definitely
Majin guy, girl, this is the lineup he should bring. If you have your takes, feel free to share them with us.
Yeah, and I mean, we just had we've had some players bring out like what they think Majin might bring in chat already, and like these are like all interesting takes to consider. And like I really hope that Majin just proves us wrong this week. That would be super exciting.
He's prepping for he's prepping for Fab Worlds. He is in my DMs, getting a lineup for the Open this weekend. Maybe while I send him that, I'll just ship him a different CDS lineup and we'll see what happens.
Bro, he's got a whole plane ride to build decks, and that's not just like that's not like an hour plane ride either. He's going to the other side of the world. So
he has plenty of time.
All right. Well, if no one has anything for us, and I'm all drained on announcements, I think, so I will leave you, Aikado, to get prepped for Worlds. The Open, and then Worlds afterwards, obviously.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Got you. I will be cheering on everyone from the sidelines, I think.
I know you could win the last chance qualifier. That's next weekend.
I could. I think I'm a little invested in this champion draft series thing, though.
Okay. That's fair enough.
I'm still bronze and eternal, man. It's
well, don't worry. So this weekend's the Open. The next one is a last chance qualifier. That one's in standard. So if you're more familiar with standard, that might be this round. Pull up, win some games,
maybe
qualify for Worlds.
You know what? When you make it sound that easy, I might just do it. But we'll have to see. Anyways, thank you for everyone who followed the series during this stream. We didn't shout anyone out specifically, but I've been seeing all of you here, and thank you all for following and participating in the series. I look forward to being able to share more of it with you rather soon. But until then, take care, and we will see you all next week.